Good morning. I am Mitchell Wallerstein, the president of Baruch College, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this morning. Thank you. Thank you. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this morning and to introduce our distinguished speaker, Ambassador Hahn Choong-hee, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, along with someone who really needs no introduction, Dr. David Birdsall, the Dean of the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs, who will serve as the program moderator. Ambassador Hahn has most generously agreed to make remarks this morning, despite the fact that, as I'm sure everyone knows, this is UN week and the General Assembly is in session, and he has many other duties to attend to. As a result, I know that he is on a very tight schedule this morning. Before introducing him, let me just note that this event was the result of a very interesting luncheon conversation that Ambassador Hahn and I had, along with Dr. Myung-Soo Lee, our Vice Provost for Global Education. This conversation occurred just prior to North Korea's most recent nuclear test, which appears to have been of a thermonuclear weapon, and before they test-fired their first apparent ICBM. Nevertheless, he and I were strongly in agreement about the mounting danger and the potential instability created by threats and counter-threats being made by the North Korean and United States leaders. Given that I myself spent considerable amount of time over the past 20 years thinking and writing about and making policy regarding North Korean nuclear and missile threats, especially during 5 years when I served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Counterproliferation in the Clinton administration, the ambassador and I had a most interesting exchange of views, and he was gracious enough to accept my invitation to come to the college to share his knowledge more broadly. If anything, the situation on the Korean Peninsula has become even more dangerous as a result of these recent North Korean tests and the hyper-bellicose rhetoric issued in the name of Kim Jong-un that threaten nuclear missile attacks on Guam and on the continental United States. So this discussion could not be more timely or important. Let me now introduce our speaker, after which Dean Birdsall will moderate a Q&A discussion. Hahn Choong-hee is currently Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, the position he has held since 2014. He was also elected as chairperson of the 47th session of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law from 2014 to 2015. Ambassador Hahn's major positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have included Director General for Cultural Affairs, the Sherpa and spokesman for the 2012 Seoul Nuclear Security Summit, and Deputy Director General for North Korean Nuclear Affairs. As a career diplomat, his expertise includes North Korean nuclear affairs, nuclear nonproliferation, regional architecture, surrounding the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia, among a number of other areas. He also served at the Korean embassies in Washington, D.C., Lagos, Nigeria, Vienna, and Paris. Ambassador Hahn received his MA in International Relations from the University of Pennsylvania and a BA from Seoul National University, and he has also studied at the University of Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne. Ambassador, we are deeply grateful for your willingness to take time, especially in this busy week, to join us, and we are eager to hear what you have to say. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, President Wallerstein, and all Baruch College staff for inviting me on this important subject. This time is quite timely. As you see, this is the starting day of the United Nations General Assembly, starting with the address of President Trump in the morning, around 10 a.m. So this is very important moment. And I think the UN General Assembly session is important in terms of all important speeches from leaders around the world, but at the same time, there are so many bilaterals and trilaterals. So Korea, US, and Korea, US, Japan will have a bilateral and trilateral. And also in Thursday, we'll have a special session of UN Security Council to discuss a non-proliferation issue, focusing on North Korea. So we have a series of important sessions, and also it is timely to talk about this issue because we are in really critical juncture on North Korean issue, particularly nuclear and missile capability. Today, before we join interactive discussion, I will lay down my observation on the issue of North Korean nuclear issue and also Korean Peninsula issue as a whole. Let me tell you briefly on the position or where we are on North Korean intention of North Korean nuclear capability, and what is the intention of major players, US, Korea, Japan, and China, Russia, and what is the reaction of the United Nations, particularly Security Council resolution. So this is my summary. First of all, what is North Korea's intention, and what is their future plan, to play a game or strategy? I think North Korea's primary goal to pursue this nuclear and missile capability is to, first of all, like a regime survival, everybody understand, because they are suffering with a lot of resources because they are focusing on military first, and they are sacrificing all basic needs of the people. And they are cornered by South Korea and Japan and Russia and China, and also eventually United States. So they need a certain safety net for their regime, or leadership, and even state itself. So this is one of the reasons, and particularly like vis-a-vis domestic sphere. They are fearing some kind of, upheaval or different protests from the people. So I think the sense of crisis, saying that we are intimidated by U.S. and hostile policy of U.S., we need solidarity, unity with this military first thing to defend our country. So this is a message of controlling every factions and people in North Korea, and to oppress any possible coup or any attempt to disrupt the leadership. Secondly, vis-a-vis South Korea, they are facing a big difference of capability in terms of general economic and even conventional military powers. South Korea is GMP terms 44 times bigger than North Korea, and also all conventional and modernization of the weapons is incomparable. But North Korea would like to have this kind of nuclear and missile capability to compensate this asymmetrical difference of capability, and also possible who knows absorption type of integration. They are fearing that kind of scenario. I think if they have a nuclear and missile capability, they can feel that maybe this can be a last resort to protect their regime and leadership. Thirdly, vis-a-vis with the United States, I think they don't know what will happen, even though there is no any hostile intention from the United States. But North Korea would like to have this nuclear and also delivery system to be reached in the mainland of the United States. This can be a leverage for North Korea to negotiate any kind of deal in the future. So that was several reasons why North Korea is pursuing nuclear weapons. They are almost on the verge of weaponization and operationalization of nuclear and missile capability, with a very small and warhead to be equipped, fitted to ICBM level, together with the full capacity like re-entry technology and everything. So that was their intention. I think we are on the verge of arriving that level, because they are firing more than 20, 30 different missiles during a couple of years intensively. So I think their ambition is quite clear and their timetable is clear. Position of U.S., Korea, Japan, as you know, we are in coordinating to cope with this challenge in every capital and every juncture, and raise this issue in the Security Council emergency meeting on every important launch of nuclear test. We are believing that to give enough pressure to North Korea with sanction. Sanction is one important means of diplomacy because it's difficult to make any coercive, any preventive or preemptive strike at this juncture. It is problematic in terms of international law, but also difficult to think about in terms of geostrategic point of view, considering like China and Russia. So we are focusing on diplomatic means, right? So that's the reason why we are doing UN sanction as one of the most important tool to achieve to change North Korea's attitude. At this juncture, it's not easy, but I think we are starting with UN sanctions, starting with March last year. So it's less than 2 years. So we need some time, to make this resolution working and giving impact, real impact to North Korea. We are coordinating every time U.S., Japan, Korea, and particularly U.S. is leading this process, as you know, because North Korea is always would like to have a bilateral contact or deal with the United States, right? So they are saying hostile policy of the United States as always important criteria, why they are pursuing nuclear weapons and ICBM capability. So U.S. is trying to give a strong message, but at the same time, they would like to engage with North Korea, in my view, but we don't know when and how exactly. But I think at this juncture, North Korea is firing a lot of ICBMs and nuclear tests. They are saying this is not the right time, to talk about and having dialogue with North Korea. But even though they have a dialogue with North Korea, I don't think this is appeasing, North Korea. But U.S. can give a very strong message to North Korea that without meeting this kind of requirement, the future of the North Korea, or future of the relationship between Pyongyang and Washington is not feasible. I think that will be Washington's message to Pyongyang. South Korea, with the new leadership, is trying to give some comprehensive approach, right? Pressuring North Korea with the UN sanction, with some secondary boycott, unilateral sanction from major players. But at the same time, we have to engage with North Korea with giving some showing, better future for them if they abandon nuclear weapons or nuclear ambition. So this is a ongoing engagement policy of our new Moon's government. And in terms of China, Japan, China, Russia, I will briefly tell you. China is a little bit ambivalent. I think I can say the dilemma. That's the expression even Chinese side is telling us, because they have a very famous 3 no's: no war on the Korean Peninsula, no war, and no nuclear, and also no non-peaceful means. So this is 3 principles they are always saying. It's quite clear that China is opposing nuclear North Korea. Particularly this latest nuclear test, China used the strongest terms, like condemn. They didn't use condemn North Korea's provocation beforehand, but this time they used it. And also in UN Security Council statement after we adopt the latest resolution, Chinese ambassador was saying that in the introductory part, a very strong protest and condemning North Korean action, and so this is the message China is trying to give. But at the same time, they don't want any instability in surrounding the Korean Peninsula, like no war, no non-peaceful means. So this is a dilemma, to achieve no nuclear in North Korea, but at the same time, no instability on the Korean Peninsula. So they don't want any sudden change of like leadership or regime, like collapse, or that will trigger some kind of integration of, change of this landscape of Northeast Asia. They don't want, quick change of balance power, in this region. That's the concern of China. And also, they don't want to see any increase of American military asset in this region, with the region of like this nuclear and missile capability. And China is also supporting Russia. Russia is supporting a Chinese position to, we call it suspension for suspension, suspension of North Korea military nuclear and missile activities, but at the same time suspension of joint military exercise between US and Korea. And also parallel talk on denuclearization, at the same time peace treaty talk. So that's what the Chinese is proposing. Russia is supporting that point too. So I think they are coordinating, cooperating together to make this dynamism from confrontation and rhetoric crossfire toward a peaceful and diplomatic way. Of course, Korea, Japan, United States want a diplomatic solution, but at this juncture, North Korea is rejecting any dialogue because they would like to achieve certain level of missile and nuclear capability, so that they are positioning much better and higher position vis-a-vis and United States. That's what they are doing. So we are in a very difficult juncture, but we'll see how the situation will unfold. In the United Nations, I'm dealing with the United Nations. United Nations unanimously adopted always this sanction toward North Korea. So far, we have 12 sanctions starting from early 90s, first nuclear crisis. And focusing on nuclear, we have 9 sanctions so far. So those resolutions will tell us that North Korea is totally isolated and absolutely cornered by international society. So UN members is 193, but I can say is like 192 versus 1. So this is a proposition I can tell you. I don't think North Korea, can be sustainable with this kind of total isolation, even though they are demonstrating, nuclear and missile capability. That's where we are. So we are closely monitoring the situation and working together with the United States and Japan and UK, France, all allies with the diplomatic way to the extent possible. But we are demonstrating our joint defense commitment between US and Korea to cope with any possible provocation and challenges coming from the United States, North Korea. That's what we are doing at this moment. So I hope that you are worried about a lot of possible difficult situation in the Korean Peninsula, and also there are some Korean students and Korean American community. Also they are giving very cautious attention to this region. But we are working together to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. But we should be united to achieve this goal. So I hope this morning's discussion can help you to understand better on this situation. I think this is my introductory remark, and we'll continue. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Ambassador, for that overview. I think it puts the context fairly clearly, but I have a number of questions, pardon me, about exactly where we find ourselves and how the current circumstances differ from some of the circumstances that prompted those prior 11 sanctions efforts against North Korea. Clearly, one of the things we're looking at here is the development or the near-term development of an ICBM capability. There's a military difference in that regard. There's also a significant difference in U.S. rhetoric in response. We've heard a number of things from President Trump that sound an awful lot like deadlines and red lines. The time for diplomacy is rapidly expiring. It is not tolerable for the DPRK to possess ICBM technology. How does President Trump's change in diplomatic tone on the U.S. side change the nature of this dilemma, which in some respects has existed for some time?
I think it's quite natural to see and hear what President Trump is saying, without talking about specific wording and rhetoric. But in terms of general position of new administration of the United States, it's time to think about, how we can react and address this important issue for the safety and security of the United States. There are so many 27,000 U.S. forces stationing in South Korea. And if North Korea is trying to intimidate with a missile and together with a nuclear warhead toward the mainland United States or Guam, it is a really important, security or national security issue. So because, and also North Korea is trying to intimidate with the nuclear, capability or possible nuclear strike. Even though it is, in my view, more rhetoric rather than substantial, action. But I think as someone, who is responsible for the safety and security of the United States, I think he or she should be ready to give a strong message toward, any adversary, particularly like North Korea. But I think, even though they are talking about red line and, some important, moment of truth, but I think that was part of a general strategy toward North Korea to give a strong message, without excluding any possible even military option, in case North Korea is threatening directly to some, mainland or part of the United States, even South Korea, we are alliance. So if North Korea's attack is aiming towards South Korea, I think it's the same way of attacking U.S. mainland, because I think with the defense treaty between U.S. and ROK in 1953, the attacking to one country is regarded as attacking the other country. So we are supposed to support each other. So I think that is a strong message toward North Korea. If something comes up, we take it very serious way to react, to the extent possible, and commensurate with the level of North Korea's provocation. So I think it worked with some, even though it is rhetoric, I think it worked with North Korea, but at the same time with China, right? China, after the strong message from Trump and even from strong message from Pyongyang, China was reading the situation and interpret that situation is really critical. And I think China conveyed a strong message publicly, at the same time, in my view, privately, to, I think, with, not privately, but I think with official channel, but I think without noticing that. I think that worked, just you heard that like a possible strike, in the area of Guam, right, from North Korea. But I think there was rain with some rhetoric. But I think the realizing the urgency of this situation from Beijing, I think worked some way to give a strong message to North Korea.
Let's talk a little bit about Beijing's position here. Some of the things that Kim Jong-un has done seem very deliberately guiding toward bearding Xi Jinping on the eve of the Party Congress next month. The timing of the missiles over Japan, we've had 2 overflights now, and as you point out, there are 3 Chinese no's, and one of them is no nukes, but it seems that we are very close to having to accommodate ourselves to a North Korea with both theater weapons and ICBMs. Is it the case that China is succeeding in some way in containing their erstwhile ally, or are both the People's Republic of China and the United States and the Republic of Korea going to have to accept that there is a nuclear-armed and nuclear-capable North Korea and just live with it?
I don't think any country, even China, Russia, of course, U.S., Japan, Korea. I don't think any country surrounding North Korea will recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. It's not possible. Even though we see reality, right? There are several nuclear devices, but this does not mean that any country will recognize and accept North Korea as a nuclear state. So I think quite clear. On the point of China, China, as I told you, is seeing North Korean issue not just the nuclear issue itself. They are, if you can zoom out, Chinese position is always seeing this situation in Korean Peninsula in the context of overall Northeast Asia geostrategic landscape, and so China is always working with the United States how to have a better and stable environment surrounding the Korean Peninsula. So with the very famous summit in Florida, the first summit, the spring first summit between Xi Jinping and Trump. So I think they have a common understanding that we need a stable Korean Peninsula, particularly reining any possible provocation from North Korea. They have a series of telephone conversation in critical juncture. But I think they have a common understanding to have a stable situation and also give a lot of pressure to North Korea not to take any provocative actions. So I think it worked in some way because they have a strong interest in terms of giving strong message to North Korea, but at the same time to agree some important resolution in the Security Council. We have 4 different resolutions starting from last January with the 5th nuclear test and also current 6th nuclear test. We have 4 very strong, one of the robust sanctions. When U.S. proposed something, I think China accepted it to a great degree to demonstrate that toward the international community and the message toward North Korea that China and the United States is working. Particularly latest sanction resolution, for the first time, we agreed to include the, oil-related item, to ban any export to North Korea, together with a lot of sectoral, bans like textile, and also previous resolution like fisheries, many important, hard currency sources. But we are, when it touching, oil related, even though it is not crude oil and like refined, petroleum product, but I think the fact that we are entering that area, giving a strong message to North Korea by through China, right? China is allowing to include that element. I think will this is an intention to give some message to Pyongyang, about possible future Chinese cooperation, even in including crude oil too.
Two more questions about China. One, President Trump, the Trump administration generally, has tried to make this into a Chinese problem, right? That China has to step up, influence North Korea. The president has tweeted both his expectations and his disappointments. Just within the last 2 to 3 days, Chinese press have begun to push back, saying, you can't accuse us of poor dealing. This is basically a U.S. problem, and diplomatic solutions are possible if the temperature is reduced on both sides. And the sanctions regime depends to a certain extent on control of named parties, but there can be other parties who are doing things who are not named parties in the agreements. And China has been accused in the past of perhaps dealing on the side and making sanctions less effective by in fact continuing to supply North Korea with a number of goods and services. So the question is, in this case, to what extent is the U.S. effort to put China in really in the hot seat here successful, and to what extent does it perhaps rebound against U.S. interests, but to what extent too does it force China to think very carefully about how it polices its side of the sanctions regime?
Chinese position is quite unique. They are trying to at the same time, as I told you, give a strong message to Pyongyang, but at the same time, they don't want to see any sudden change in the Korean Peninsula. So they are trying to, mitigate the situation with their own diplomatic way. So they are always saying diplomatic solution and dialogue and negotiation to resolve this issue. So as I told you, they are proposing, suspension for suspension, and also two-track dialogue. One is denuclearization, the other one is a peace treaty. So that's what they are doing. But this calculation between China and United States is quite unique. China is thinking always. Possible change of the situation in the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time, they would like to keep their military interest and economic interest as much as possible. So in many cases, these sanctions so far. Are not working properly and steadily, because in China there are some different evasion situation we are seeing recently. So but at the latest sanction, China is very cooperative in addressing those. Control. There is a lot of law enforcement control in borderline and many different areas. So I think China is going one step further and further to give a strong message to North Korea, not to take any provocative action, but at the same time resolve this nuclear and missile issue in a peaceful way with dialogue and negotiation. And also this dialogue and negotiation, we are talking about this issue in UN Security Council, and this week too, how we can resolve this issue, because the six-party talk is almost suspended, and Secretary General Guterres is trying to play a certain role as like a Secretary General of the United Nations, as a good office. So that is his message. I'm at your disposal. So he is expecting some positive signal from important member state for him to have some leverage in helping resolve this issue. That's where we are.
Thank you. I have one more question for the ambassador, but I wanted to give you all a heads up. After I ask that question, and it will be a completely horrifying question, at least in terms of the predicate, but after I ask that question, it's your turn. So I wanted just to let you know to be on alert, to start thinking about what questions you will have for the ambassador. We'll be out there in just a moment. Ambassador, I know that you believe that this will ultimately be resolved diplomatically, and that much of what we hear from the DPRK is sort of the standard rhetorical bluster that we've heard for a very long time. But there is also a stream of thought that's been published widely in the US among defense analysts over the course of the last several weeks that posits that there's actually a rational basis for Kim Jong-un to use his nuclear weapons, theater nuclear weapons to take out US military bases and allied military bases in the region. We know he has a demonstrated capacity just within the last week to fly a missile over 3,500 kilometers. We know he can get it there, and if he can put a payload onto that missile, which we have to assume he is capable of doing at that range, then the capability exists. And then bank on the unwillingness of the United States, given the prospect of an attack on the homeland, to respond with massive force of its own. How probable do you think that is? And again, this isn't coming out of the DPRK, this is coming out of US defense and military analysts. How probable do you think that is? And were that to happen in any dimension, what would be the nature of the international response? I told you it would be horrifying.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind this proposition or occasion on possible military confrontations around the Korean Peninsula. As I told you, North Korea is always saying that there is a long, standing threat from United States. They call it hostile policy of the United States toward North Korea. But hostile policy, but they don't explain what that means. They don't have any definition on hostile policy. But this is very important, political rhetoric from Pyongyang in giving any excuse, and any provocative action from North Korea. But from U.S. point of view, United States already provided 5-6 different times to give assurance to North Korea. U.S. does not have any intention to invade or attack, no hostile intention toward North Korea. In first important statement is 1993 joint statement between U.S. and DPRK. And following year, 1994, very famous Geneva Agreed Framework, right? And 2000, U.S. DPRK joint communique. And 2005, six-party talks guiding principle. And latest one is 2012, so-called Leap Day Agreement in February 29. So all 5 important documents between U.S. and DPRK, U.S. never missed to include U.S. does not have intention to invade or attack. You can think about, there is no point to invade or attack North Korea, right? But North Korea is creating and agitating that there is always a hostile policy of the United States. I think this is an excuse and pretext to develop nuclear weapons and missile capability. But think about, as I told you, it's difficult to think about any preemptive strike from the United States because there is no hostility. There is no point to attack with military strike without having unquestionable and convincing reasons that that particular, like a missile launch is aiming toward like Guam or mainland the United States, if you have a clear evidence to justify that case, preemptive strike could be allowed. Without that evidence, just with rhetoric and intimidation with the word from the Pyongyang, I don't think the U.S. can attack first. Like a preventive strike is very controversial, terminology and difficult to justify at this juncture. On the other hand, Pyongyang, even though they are saying, one of the, harshest, language in their statement and a lot of intimidation, blackmailing. But think about, if they attack Guam, mainland, or even South Korea or Japan, but they will see, immense and, intolerable retaliation from the United States, including conventional or nuclear, warhead and strike, commensurate with what North Korea is doing, and also sometimes much stronger capability from the United States. So I think that is the maybe last day of North Korea. So I think they are using very measured, rhetoric when they are saying that, they could have a test fire toward the Guam, right? Specific area surrounding the Guam, 4-point, we call it envelope strike. But the fact that they are saying, specific area, which is, outside of, territorial sea, and giving distance and details of information, is indicating that, this is like a tactical way to intimidate, United States and, disrupt, unified position among important allies. That's what if they would like to strike, they may use, they don't publish that information, and they can do it, like secretly and, suddenly. So I don't think, this kind of military confrontation is feasible and possible, considering this point of view. And also, as I told you, Chinese strong position to see, stability and peaceful solution on this issue surrounding the Korean Peninsula. And also there is a important UN Charter and international law to oppose any possible first strike with military means. So with this, calculation and proposition between Pyongyang, Washington, and Beijing, and even South Korea, so we are coordinating with Washington on this possible, measures and means in the future. So we are in relatively, calm and, cautious and measured approach, than before. Yeah.
Thank you. It's now your turn, Linda. Do we have mics to run?
We have cards.
We have cards. Okay.
Are there any questions?
So the questions should go on cards, and then I will read the cards. So your question will be asked.
We have a question over here. The cards are on the table.
Cards are on the table, and then I will pick. Is President Putin taking advantage of North Korea threats for Russia's interests?
Very interesting question. Russia traditionally has very strong interest and stake in North Korean issue and Korean Peninsula. But as starting from first nuclear crisis in early 90s up until recently, this North Korea issue was handled between mainly United States and China. In negotiating any sanction in the Security Council, first draft was tabled out from the United States, and they have direct contact and deal and negotiation with China. up until the last moment of adoption. So Russia has been a little bit sidelined and not in center stage of this whole process of negotiation. But recently, China is very active, in terms of engagement of this negotiation of the Security Council process. But at the same time, they are proposing some formula. We can call it like a roadmap to picking up Chinese proposition, like suspension for suspension and dual track dialogue, denuclearization peace treaty. But they are adding several couple of things, to agree on, guiding principle in this region, and also include the normalization of relations between U.S. and North Korea. At the same time, Northeast Asia, regional security structure, something like that. So they are more active. I think there are a couple of reasons. One is they would like to claim their legitimate interest on surrounding the Korean Peninsula because they are locating, in North Korea and bordering North Korea. And also thinking about possible future economic project, right? Pipeline, a lot of railroad with economic interest. And thirdly, I think the recent active engagement of Russia is telling us that I think Russia is thinking that we are in very critical juncture on Korean Peninsula issue. I think Korean Peninsula could be moved in a very unpredictable situation, changing regional architecture, as I told you, balance of power. So Russia now is watching very closely what is going on in Pyongyang and what is going on in Korean Peninsula in Northeast Asia. So because we are in critical juncture, I think that's some reasons why Russia is very active.
Terrific. We have a host of questions here. Several are interested in exploring the feelings of the people of South Korea, both in the face of the North Korean threat and in the prospect of Japanese remilitarization. Can you talk about the sense of security in the Republic of Korea right now, and also any feelings toward the prospect that Japan may acquire weapons that it has forsworn since the Second World War?
That is sensitive, of course. But generally, South Korean people, the proposition that I told you, it's difficult to have a real war on the Korean Peninsula because we just talk about a lot of rhetoric, and I think war is possible and in the near future. But as I told you, there is no any strategic point of view to attack first from any side, from Pyongyang or Washington, South Korea, China, and Japan. There is no point to talk about this kind of possible military confrontation, but only Pyongyang and Washington, right? But as I told you, there is no point to make a first strike, right? So that is from Pyongyang is like a suicidal act, and Washington, there's no point to do that, without any immediate attack from North Korea. So I think we are hearing and experiencing so many different intimidation and rhetoric, and even possible attack from North Korea, right? Some bombshell in island, and but we are experiencing that behavior from North Korea. So we are maybe some used to it, and we know the calculus and tactic of North Korea quite well. Maybe if we are fearing, worrying so much and buying a lot of daily needs like noodle and water from supermarket and chaotic situation, maybe that's what North Korea is aiming to see. But that is one of the reasons that we are relatively calm, and having daily life. And the fact that if there is a possible, war in the near future, maybe U.S. administration will evacuate, many, American citizens living in, South Korea, like almost, hundred thousands of, U.S. citizens is living in North Korea without any problem. And also, like, rating companies like Moody's and, they are closely watching what is going on in Korean Peninsula. If there is a chaotic situation, I think the rating is going down, and this is, devastating to South Korean economy. So, of course, we are not idling. We are closely watching, but we see exactly what North Korea's calculation is all about. Japanese, situation. Japan, they have a alliance with the United States. They are protecting. They get protection from United States on possible confrontation or military attack from any side. We hope that and believe that Japan will stay as it is, like non-nuclear policy for the time being, because we are trying to maximize our policy on non-nuclear and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This is our commitment. Without giving any excuse to North Korea. If we develop a nuclear weapon, and South Korea and Japan will make this Northeast Asia situation more, complicated and difficult to resolve, and also giving or embolden North Korea, to develop more and more nuclear weapons. So we should be calm, and we should be reserved on any possible discussion on nuclear capability. I think even though we have some resentment of past history with Japan, but now majority of South Korean people are thinking that cooperation and coordination with Japan on important security issues like addressing North Korean nuclear is quite critical for South Korean national interest. That's what we are.
Okay. One questioner would like to know about recent reports that that South Korea is developing a decapitation squad, perhaps being able to assault Kim Jong-un himself and take him out, and perhaps then change the behavior of the regime. A, is that happening? B, is it a realistic prospect, and were there to be a DPRK with no Kim Jong-un, what would be achieved with that kind of an action?
Yeah. Personally, I don't I don't like that wording, decapitation thing. But let me explain in this way. Usually, military terms, right? Military terms is very direct, and to the point, without any, misinterpretation. That's the reason why they are accustomed to use that kind of wording. But that is a very theoretic. I think, military option is always, prepare, any worst case scenario, right? So they have to prepare anything. This is not. I can assure you that this is not a way of offensive and the proactive way of doing that kind of thing. This is very defensive. In case of any military provocation of North Korea towards South Korea, then we have to prepare possible reaction, right? And for our national defense. So in preparing many defense posture together with the United States, we are in military tactic and strategic point of view. What is the best way to cope with this situation? We usually take leadership point of, like adversary military, power. So that's, I think, a natural, preparation to think about, that aspect, to try to attack, leadership area so that disrupt, whole, adversary forces, something like that. I think that's the reason why that conception was introducing. But I don't think that is like policy rebel, like South Korean policy to decapitation of leadership. I don't think that is the case. This is solely military terms and military wording to prepare any possible eventuality. But I don't think we are moving this one as a, like our slogan or our policy to as a first priority. I don't think that is the case. As I told you, there is no point to attack North Korea first. From South Korea, United States. This is solely uniquely and completely for defensive purpose.
There are several questions about Kim Jong-un. Variously described as a madman, as extraordinarily intelligent, as a combination of the two, plainly trying to emulate his grandfather more than his father. Does he represent a substantive difference in the Kim regime? And how has the nature of the kind of diplomacy that you practice changed under this Kim?
Yeah, even Rocket Man.
Yes, Rocket Man.
I think to understand North Korea's position currently, I think understanding Kim Jong-un is quite important, critical. Nobody will understand, 100% what Kim Jong-un is thinking and will do in the future. But think about, I heard from one North Korean defector, who arrived in South Korea. He told in television, he said that there are three pillars to support, North Korea. One is charismatic leadership. Second one is public distribution system. You know what public distribution system? PDS is providing ration every day, like rice and feeding. This is socialist system, right? We call it public distribution system. Third one is like a brutal reign of terror and police and security surveillance. Those are three pillars to support North Korean society. But charismatic leadership has been already diffused and minimized with the successive three-generation leadership change. And second, the public distribution system has been almost collapsed because they don't have resources, right? Because they are pouring all resources to military and nuclear capability. So only limited person, like inner circle people will receive very minimum ration every day. So they are still existing as a third pillar, right? Reign of terror, security and safety community to control and monitoring and surveillance everything in North Korea's daily activities. So his point is only having this third pillar. His point is he doesn't believe that North Korea is sustainable, and having only a third pillar. So Kim Jong-un, I think he's thinking that this very diffused and limiting his charismatic leadership toward the North Korean people, having power, I think less than 30 years old. He would like to pretend that he has capability and strong leadership. He knows everything, like omnipotent, omniscient. That is, complex. I think he has. So if you see some, video footage on his, they call it like education and teaching to every important, area. he's pretending that, like he's like a king, and like, brutal leadership, sometimes giving very, strong, instruction, even for, elder, generals, and party leaders, even like his father or grandfather's, age. And sometimes he's embracing, people like, very compassionate, leader. So he's pretending that, he's controlling everything inside of North Korea. And also, he believes that even though two leaders, they are sometimes expressing that, denuclearization, even Kim Jong-il, second, leader, he said that denuclearization is like a dying will of, Kim Il-sung, founder of North Korea. He reiterated. That's the reason they agreed, like six-party talks in 2005 to abandon all nuclear weapons program. But, now Kim Jong-un is thinking that, I think, a possession of nuclear weapons together with ICBM will be, I think, a last resort to secure his leadership and regime and nation itself. I think that is his preoccupation, and he's moving that direction, right? So he is always trying to sit on the site, on any important nuclear test or important ICBM launch to demonstrate that, he's in controlling everything or giving specific instruction. He's sometimes writing certain instruction and with a signature, and it is televised by North Korea's, central television broadcasting service to demonstrate to the domestic and international audience that Kim Jong-un is full control. But in some sense, he's very, calculated, and he knows, he understands what is going on surrounding his country, what U.S. is thinking. I think he's quite young. He studied in Switzerland for several years. He knows what is going on. But as he is in power in very unique and opaque state like North Korea, he wants to continue his leadership and power. So even though he's calculated, but his behavior looks like a very mad, and insane sometimes, to give a lot of provocation and harsh words. I think it's inevitable for him with this getting into this power, and the situation is really difficult for him to manage. He's cornered, and limited resources. So he's tried to avoid isolation, but I think he has very limited options. Only like this nuclear and missile capability. And also he went too far. It's difficult to come back, and it's almost irrevocable, I think. But we are always telling them, there is a hope that if you can change the calculus and come back to dialogue, because South Korea is ready to cooperate and provide any humanitarian assistance, because majority of North Korean people are malnutrition and even stunned. For North Korean children, their brain size is much smaller than their peer group in South Korea. So if we see unification in sometime in the future, there is an intermarriage between North Korean youth and South Korean youth, right? Love is love there, right? You cannot control that. So I think we will see next generation and next generation. So I think even though it is now separate, but it's not different issue. It's Korean issue, Korean people's issue. Thinking about future integration and unification, we have to live together. So I think it's just this like a next generation issue is already conceived in in current situation. So this is what the very thorough and difficult, hard from South Korean point of view to provide, more resources that we have. As I told you, 44 times bigger than North Korea GNP point of view. We would like to provide, engage with peaceful way. We are having a lot of different projects and cooperative, programs in the future and joint project. But, with this adamant position of North Korea is protecting possible cooperation and also possible mass, assistance from South Korea to help North Korean people. So it's very regrettable situation, but I hope that, if we can pray and, work together and with a unified position, to achieve that goal, I will hope that if we are totally united and give a strong message in terms of, peaceful and diplomatic way, like, UN sanction, so that North Korea, Kim Jong-un can understand, this situation. And if they think that possession of a nuclear weapon, they have to pay much higher price than without nuclear weapon, or even that possession of nuclear weapon can threaten their leadership and regime itself. If they can realize that point, maybe that's the time to think about, peaceful solution. Yeah.
Well, on that hopeful note, we did promise the ambassador that we would be able to get him uptown again before things heat up at the UN today. In front of you is a survey. Linda's holding up a copy right now. We'd appreciate it if you'd fill that out and let us know how you reacted to this forum and, of course, to all Marx issues forums. But before you do that, please join me in thanking Ambassador Hahn for sharing his thoughts so generously with us today. Thank you so much.